What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Thursday edition of Back Your Play with Q. As always, I'm your host, Rich Quinones, hashtag BYP on social media at Rich Q, IG, Twitter, the YouTube channel as well. We got everything today. We got the Throw It Lodgers. We got a little afternoon hot toddy. We got the free agent period in the NFL, which is slated to kick off March 15th. To help us break it down a little more is our good friend, our NFL insider, Lloyd Vance, at Lloyd Vance on Twitter. Lloyd, how are you?
Doing great, Q. NFL never sleeps.
No.
I feel like we just talked about the Super Bowl, but now we're starting to get ready for free agency, and next thing you know, it'll be the league here in early March.
Yeah, well, it appears Aaron Rodgers has come out of hiding, so that decision will be interesting to see how it plays out. I find it fascinating because if you really dig a little deeper with this whole scenario, if he decides to go back to the Packers or he retires, you're probably going to have 4 or 5 teams and maybe their media alike that are probably going to absolutely hammer this guy, right? The Jets seem to be putting all their eggs in one basket with this Aaron Rodgers sweepstakes. There are other teams out there as well, but I think the ego, the money, I think ultimately he comes back and I think he plays in Green Bay. I mean, if you're the head coach if you're LaFleur and you've had the type of run that he has, wouldn't you want to ride it out another year or two with Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, Q. And then, you didn't talk about the salary cap hit as well.
Yeah.
It's just huge. It's almost $50 million. So it's going to be very difficult to move Aaron Rodgers. And you're correct. The first 3 years together, Rodgers and LaFleur had 13 wins or more. And, I just think that this is his best shot in terms of trying to get further into postseason Aaron Rodgers with this young group that they've assembled there. So, they do have some good young receivers finally for him to work with, and Christian Watson and the rest of that crew. And, I think in the end, Rodgers will decide to say now. It's going to be interesting what he thinks about in his cave, though.
Well, I mean, he's appeared, it's almost like Gus the Groundhog. We'll see. We get a couple more weeks of winter. I would, let's just say, for instance, there is his report that Green Bay was ready to move on from him and they're turned off by him. So if that's the case, are they really willing to go into a 3, 4, 5-year rebuild with Jordan Love, or would they even try to maybe bring in a bridge quarterback for a year or two? If Rodgers, let's say they trade Rodgers or he retires and they decide we're not going to go with Love, but we'll go with a cheaper version of Aaron Rodgers for a year or two. We just don't want the headache anymore, and we'll deal with a bridge quarterback, and we'll groom Jordan Love.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because Caleb Williams is out there, the current Heisman Trophy winner for USC, and he's the big prize going into next year, as well as the North Carolina quarterback. So the two of them, a lot of people are looking towards not this draft, but the 2024 draft. And, you have to start to wonder about Jordan Love. Yeah. Is a guy that they've had around, and he's on the bench. He knows the system, but he's had his opportunities, and he came up short several times as a starter. So, if Rodgers doesn't stay, then I think that quarterback job would be wide open. Obviously, Love would get the first opportunity because he's a high draft pick. But, I expect Rodgers to be back. But that would be interesting to see if he decides maybe to retire or he ends up someplace else, what Green Bay would do.
And if Green Bay decides to move on and trade him, obviously they're going to stick him out of the conference. You're going to trade him over to the AFC. I know this fantasy land when it comes to Jet fans. They want Aaron Rodgers. If I'm the Jets and you've got a list of some of these free agents. So again, let's assume some of these guys are going to go back to their teams. Jackson, we'll say for the time being, Baltimore. Geno back to Seattle. Daniel Jones back to the Giants. Then you have Carr, Jimmy G. I think you have Jacoby Brissett, Dalton, Baker Mayfield, Teddy Bridgewater, Mike White. Okay. If you're the Jets, I don't know how you look at that Derek Carr situation and say, well, he was a leader. He shouldn't have left the team, or maybe he didn't want to be a distraction, or the Raiders tried to make him look like the bad guy and the fall guy, and they have egg on their face. But I would be more inclined to go after Derek Carr than Aaron Rodgers, because I think Derek Carr comes with 99% less of the baggage that Aaron Rodgers comes with, and he's younger. And there's that lack of drama. This just reminds me of the Jets going down this path with Brett Favre back in 2008. So it's almost as though I caution the Jet fan, be careful what you wish for. And if it was me, I would probably make more of a run for Derek Carr, because Aaron Rodgers can come out of his hole today, tomorrow, next week, Lloyd, and he still hasn't really made up his mind. And he's still going to play that waiting game. And then all of a sudden, what happens now? We creep into March, and you're a franchise. You don't want to wait around for a guy to make a decision.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Q. And Derek Carr is a very interesting name out there because he has a lower price tag, obviously, than Aaron Rodgers, and he's a guy that is a total free agent. So he's going to be able to move around, check out what opportunities out there, whether it's the Carolina Panthers, whether it's the Jets. That'll be a good spot for him. Rodgers, you're right, brings a whole set of headaches. And a lot of guys I've talked to around the league have said the same thing. The last couple of years, he's kind of stayed away to the last minute in terms of getting into training camp, into OTAs, and just being an overall leader of the team. So you want your quarterback to be first and foremost in these off-season activities and then leading into the draft so you can have your plan around him. So, Green Bay is probably going to push him, try to get him to make a decision. But if he draws this thing out, it could get ugly. And then you're right, the Jets, they need to, after the draft, they're going to have a lot of probably another good picks. They had a good draft last year under Joe Douglas. They're going to want to move forward. So I think Carr probably be their guy in terms of moving forward or moving up in the draft and getting another quarterback. But right now, I just don't think Rodgers is going to land in New York.
Is there any part of you that believes he's going to continue to play because the money, the ego, and the fact that Brady just retired and he certainly doesn't want to go into the Hall of Fame the same time Brady goes? It's all about the ego.
Yeah, the money and the ego, you definitely laid out some big points there in terms of Aaron Rodgers. We know that he's been difficult to get along with his teammates sometimes. And there's that ego thing out there, he's never does anything wrong, so I do think that he does not want to go out and not making the playoffs, and he'll want to go back to Lambeau and earn that money that they've given him. He does have an opportunity with some young players, and then that division's pretty wide open. We saw Minnesota win it, but they're a team that's kind of struggling, especially against the Packers. So I think Rodgers comes back, but I do think he waits the last second once again, and then that'll kind of, Mark Murphy's off-season plan. It'll have to go from there. Mark Murphy's the head of the team, so we'll see how they go from there.
Thursday edition of BYP with Q. Rich Quinones here, our NFL insider Lloyd Vance, kind enough to join us. Thursday edition from our good friends over at One with Light Tequila, women-owned, certified, organic, award-winning ultra tequila, which I can probably use a couple shots of that to knock out these allergies. One with Life Tequila.com. This is what happens, right? You get 30, then 40, then 50, then 60. Now it's back to 40. 19 fights on Saturday night probably did not help the vocal cords, but here we are talking a little NFL. Lloyd says, you know what? I get it. You're on the shelf. Play through it. That's what we have to do. All right. Let's get to the Giants and Daniel Jones, because everyone has their own opinion on Daniel Jones, and he switched agents, as you and I both know. I will not sit here on BYP and go on the record and say Daniel Jones is worth $40 to $45 million. But I have no problem with this getting leaked by the agent, because you want to have it as potential leverage. And why would I fault a player or someone who's trying to get the most out of their job and or their company? And before we dive deeper into this, here's another thing. No one's talking about this. John Mara did not help himself out when he went on the record, and the paraphrase said, we pretty much have done everything to ruin this kid. Now, all of a sudden, third head coach, multiple offensive coordinators, and he puts up statistically the best season of his career. And he cut down on, what were the bugaboos? The turnovers, the fumbles. He had 4 to 5 game-winning drives, plus they won on the road and they beat the Vikings in the playoffs. So, again, when ownership comes out and basically says, yeah, we've kind of screwed this kid from the start. Well, now I've got a little leverage and I've got some ammunition in the chamber where, hey, by your own admission, you said you screwed me. Now help me out. Now do right by me. And oh, by the way, you didn't pick up my 5th-year option, and I went out and I backed it up. I backed my play up with a career-defining season. So where are you right now with Daniel Jones, and where do you think he's worth, right? Because we know we overpay quarterbacks, but then the market kind of steadies it out. So just overall, where do you stand with Daniel Jones right now? And do you ultimately think the Giants will sign him?
Yeah, Q, and we talk a lot about his value in terms of the other quarterbacks out there, but you have to look at his value in terms of his team. What does he do for the Giants? And Mara did paint himself in the corner there, kind of tipping his hand. So that win that he had in terms of the playoffs, where he played so well that we talked about, that was huge for him because now he wants to look at that Kyler Murray type of money that he got from the Cardinals, $230.5 million, $105 million guaranteed that he got a signing, and then he had $160 million guaranteed for an injury. So a lot of numbers that I'm throwing out to you there, but Murray has that big contract that's hanging out there, and that's probably what Daniel Jones is working off of. So it's crazy to say Daniel Jones $40 to $45 million per season player. He's the Giants leader, and you look at the contract that Dak Prescott got in the same division, it'll probably be the same one in terms of Daniel Jones. So I think he's going to get it done with the Giants. They really want to keep him. They're going to try to get him done first, and then possibly Saquon Barkley, who they could possibly franchise as well. So, they're the 2 cornerstones of that team. The Giants had that resurgence that we talked about at the end of last season, and they're going to want to bring Daniel Jones back.
But at what price, right? Because what happens now, that type of money, you almost hamstring yourself. Like you want to be able to spread it around and try to bring in other pieces of the puzzle and other players. I mean, I can see 2 years, 60, 62. Like if they're still not, all right, we'll double back, show us you can do it again, and then we'll give you that 5-year deal. And I think he'll be 26, 27, still in his prime. I don't know if I'm comfortable tying in so much money into Daniel Jones. And I've kind of been on the fence with Jones. He sold me after the season, so I'm a Jones fan. I wanted to see, but again, he still did it with one of the worst offensive lines out there, rankings wise. He also did it with not a full deck with complementary pieces and wide receivers. So I don't know. I mean, if you the exclusivity, the franchise tag on him, then you have to pay him. I don't have the numbers in front of me. What's it, like 30 something odd $million or whatever it is? I mean, that's I think it was leaked because now he can go out, try to use it from leverage. And the other thing too is if you sign that deal and a team comes and they turn around and say, we'll do better, then you get 2 first-round draft picks. And to me, that's a huge thing. No slight on the quarterback or the person, but hey, man, I mean, when push comes to shove, and then maybe you go out and you get a bridge quarterback for 2 or 3 years. I just don't like this whole let's start the process over. But I also understand where Daniel Jones is at. But again, I just think we look at 45, 40 million and think right away, oh my God, this guy's not worth it. But when you kind of peel it back a little bit, look at some of the contracts as you illustrated and highlighted of some of these quarterbacks right now in the NFL. Some of them are not worth it, but yet that's what the market dictated.
Yeah. And it's going to be interesting because salary cap goes up to $224.8 million, up from 208 last year. So, you're going to have more money to play with. And every team wants that franchise quarterback, the guy that they're going to pay and build their team around. And the Giants, I just feel like that they're one of those teams. They're going to stick with their guy no matter what. So I think he's going to get that big contract, but you have to think about, is there some way of bargaining it down or something like that? Because we talk about the salary cap, that is going to eat a large chunk of that team's cap up. And then you have some defensive guys as well that are paid pretty well in the Giants defense. So going to be real interesting to see how this plays out. But I think Jones does remain a Giant if we had to decide today.
Yeah, you're still going to figure out a way. You've got Thomas, Neal, rookie contracts. You got Thibodeau. You're going to pay Julian Love maybe. They terminated the contract to Shepard. Unfortunately, just couldn't stay healthy. You had to eat that $72 million, a horrible contract, and Kenny Galladay gave you nothing. Um, Baltimore and Lamar Jackson. So my gut's starting to tell me that we might see a Le'Veon Bell type of situation where Lamar Jackson decides I'm just going to sit out the year.
Yeah, Q, they're at a huge impasse. And we talked about Lamar Jackson and his mother's his advisor. So you don't really have an agent, and when you're in that room and it's a business. So you got the GM and the owner across the table, and they usually put out the plan and why they think you're being paid at a certain level in front of the agent. And the agent is the guy that takes all the heat and the player doesn't have to hear as well. Lamar Jackson is hearing what the Ravens really think of him. Not many playoff wins, a guy who gets hurt too much and missed, I think, almost over 6 games last year. And, of course, Lamar will counter that the team does not play well without him, and he makes the whole engine go. But, it's a tough situation for him there, sit there and hear it. And then he has to understand his total value. We talked about that Kyler Murray contract, and as well as the Deshaun Watson contract. Everybody wants to look at that one as well, where you have that guaranteed money and they're going to play up front. I just don't think the Ravens and Steve Bisciotti, their owner, do business that way. So, this is at an impasse, and he's kind of dug in, and the team is kind of trying to figure out, okay, what do they do next? Do they go in the draft and maybe take somebody? Do they make sure Huntley's locked up and he can step in? He did an okay job here and there as a spot starter for them, won some games here and there, but obviously in the playoffs did not have much they brought to the table. So each side has some leverage, but you're right. They're both dug in, and, that's what happens a lot of times, these franchise type deals. It's not going to be like what Kirk Cousins did, where he kind of, every year played on it, and then they finally gave him this big payday. I just don't see Lamar Jackson doing that.
80 career games. He's started 70 of them. So he's only played a complete season, 16 games his rookie year, 15, 15, 12, 12, obviously the MVP. We know what he brings to the table, right? We understand the talent. But here's another thing, and I'm wondering if this factors into any type of decision going forward. I mean, he didn't even travel with Baltimore for the playoffs. I mean, say what you want.
Some serious optics there, and he did that for a reason. You know what I mean? And him and Coach Harbaugh, yes, they like each other a lot, and he likes the staff and everything. But at a certain point, it's going to come down between him and the owner and how they get along, and what's his value to the team, and do they want to pay him that amount? And then we talked about the NFL. A passing quarterback is valued a lot more, and these guys that are, they run a large portion of the time.
Yep.
Owners look at that and they say, what, there's that potential for him to get hurt, and we can't pay him that amount. They always point to that Cam Newton contract and what he got from Carolina, and then he just broke down late part of his stage with that team. So he was his late 20s when that happened. And Lamar Jackson, yes, he's a pretty young guy, and I think he's probably around 25 or so. But you start looking at his injuries, and they seem not on the field. Availability is your best ability, and that's what these coaches and owners looking at.
Yeah, and you're talking about Cam Newton. That was the 2015 his MVP season, and went downhill from there. Lamar Jackson's 26, and to your point, when he wasn't on the field, again, it's a little more illustrated and highlighted where they're losing games. But I also think the fact that rehabbing, isolation, didn't travel with team, there's optics involved in that big time. Like I said, the fact that he had his team drop that tweet regarding his injury, the PCL sprain, I don't know. It's just, it's really we say the NBA is a players league. The NFL is almost starting to be a players league, but the major difference is in the NBA, you sit there and you placate the player. In the NFL, the owners sit back and kind of chuckle and say, hey man, it is what it is. If you don't like it, we don't give a shit. I mean, that's just,
yeah, they have their rights too. Yeah, and they're going to slap the franchise tag on to make sure he won't have any movement, and he may eventually get traded, but it's going to be on the owner's terms. And unfortunately, in the NFL, they always don't have the hammer like in the other leagues.
Let's go down 95. Washington, they hired Eric Bieniemy. as offensive coordinator. And it's weird. I listen to what some former players say in regards to Bieniemy, and then you listen to a former player like LaShawn McCoy, and man, he really has such disdain, it seems, for Bieniemy. And let's not forget, McCoy had basically, a cup of coffee with the Chiefs and didn't do diddly. So I'm wondering if it's more of, he's pissed off, but he's really kind of crapping on Bieniemy. And we heard the rumors over the years he doesn't interview well. They were scared about some off the field issues. They didn't like the way he projected or he came across with the players. And I thought in order for him to kind of separate himself going forward and maybe be a head coach one day in the NFL, he had to get out of Andy Reid's shadow. So the fact now that he goes to Washington, we'll get into that. But, what does it say when you have some former players coming out and they're ripping this guy? And then conversely, you have current players coming out saying, whoa, 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 whoa. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. Shady sometimes he gets an axe to grind. He's got very strong opinions. He played on a number of teams after he left the Eagles, and the couple of situations did not end well. So, he always wanted the ball. The Eagles gave it to him, and in other places he didn't get it. And he had to kind of be a reserve type of guy. He was never really a backup type of player.
Right.
I mean? If he was starting, he was getting his carries, he was always happy. So I think that may factor into it. Obviously, Bieniemy's success speaks for itself. 2 Super Bowl championships, been to a 3rd Super Bowl that they lost, and Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback out there, will vouch for him. Now, you're right, Q. Something is amiss. I don't. A lot of people are saying, is it the Rooney Rule? Is it? It's who the owner wants to hire, and maybe he's just not connecting with these guys when he's in those interviews or something like that. And I hearken back to, there was a guy named Sherman Lewis. He was offensive coordinator underneath Mike Holmgren. Mike Holmgren called the plays for the Packers when they won a Super Bowl, and Sherman just never got his opportunity. So you wonder if Bieniemy is ever going to get that chance. Now he's going to be able to run his own show. Obviously, Ron Rivera's the defensive coach, and he's bringing Bieniemy in there to run his offense. So we'll see if he has some success. And a lot of times, if you have that success, as the Eagles just saw, where they lost both their coordinators, if you have success, then they will give you the opportunity. D'Amico Ryan's got the same thing with the Texans, and then you have Steichen going to the Colts and Gannon going to the Cardinals. So if your team's successful, you will get the chance. But it is surprising he hasn't gotten the job after this long. But there are a lot of whispers around the league why, and you just wonder where they're going to go from here.
And you talk about Washington right now. We don't know what's going to happen with the potential sale of the team and Daniel Snyder, but you look at the quarterbacks on the roster, Heineke, Wentz, and Howe. I'm wondering if Bieniemy now going to Washington, if it potentially opens up for them to maybe make a push for a Carr, a Jimmy G. I threw out Lamar Jackson's name a couple weeks ago with our guy Lake Lewis. The Teddy Bridgewaters, the Mike Whites, the Andy Daltons. Geno Smith will go back to Seattle. I might even see Derek Carr maybe with the New Orleans Saints. I don't know, but they still need a quarterback. Washington, you're not gonna win games with Heineke long term, and we know right now Carson Wentz, and I said it a couple of years ago, he is now relegated to being a journeyman backup. That's who Carson Wentz is. Carson Wentz is no longer a starter anymore in the NFL. Those days are done.
Yeah, they're done. And the thing is, Q, I think right before the league year, which is around March 10th or so, he's probably going to be cut. He's due a very large salary, I think over $30 million next season. There's no way to pay him to be the backup. And, I think Sam Howell, who's there, a really good young quarterback from the Carolina, they want to take a look at him and see what he can do. But you're right. They don't have that name quarterback, and Bieniemy's going to struggle when you don't have that main signal caller, somebody with some talent that you can design plays around. It's just not going to go real well. So he does have some pieces there with Terry McLaurin and some of the younger players on the offensive side. So maybe he'll get it done, but they definitely need a quarterback in Washington. And I do agree with you that, Lamar could be a play there. If he gets dug in, maybe they do trade him down there, so there's a lot of moving parts there, but I think Washington's in total rebuild mode, and we'll see how they go from there.
Yeah. And I think that's why you mentioned they're in rebuild mode. The Eagles are going to lose a lot of players. They just lost their coordinators respectively. They're going to have to pay Jalen Hurts eventually. Dallas is not getting any younger. That's why I thought maybe it behooved the Giants to figure out a way to bring back Jones. I don't think they're going to bring back Saquon, but point being, and you've said this, right? You can be a bad and average team, and then all of a sudden you can take that next step in a year or two. So I think those are other factors, right? Do you believe that ownerships and teams kind of look around the division and see what everyone else is doing, that weighs into maybe their decision making, or they
Yeah.
just go about their business?
Sure, Q. And you always look at you got to win your division first. We always talk
Yeah.
about that. And, they're going to look at the competitors and see what they're doing and how they're building their teams and kind of go from there. And you see it every year. There were 6 new teams that made the playoffs this year that weren't there before. And the Eagles, just look at them. They were 9-8 last year, kind of limped into the playoffs. And then this year, they were one of the best teams in the league. I think they had 16-3 going into that Super Bowl, and they lost obviously, but made a big step forward. And you see that every year, surprise team. So every owner thinks, why could that not be us? But the big thing obviously is you have to have that quarterback, somebody that's going to be, the architect of your team, and you can build around them. So it's going to be interesting to see what Washington does. But I think first and foremost, you hit on it. I think they got to figure out what they're going to do with Daniel Snyder and the ownership situation there. I tend to think they're going to try to force him to sell that team, and the money may be so high up there that he can't, turn his nose up at it. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. So this is a conversation I've had with Brandon Jacobs on 27Q. When we say force an owner to sell a team, I mean, it's by all right, it's their team. Are you saying basically put pressure on him or make him, a Godfather offer that he can't refuse? Because Daniel Snyder strikes me as a guy that, he's the one that started leaking all this information because he's got an axe to grind with 31 other owners, or, let's just say 25, 26 that want him out. So, I mean, is it, if I sit there and Lloyd, you have to say, what's the repercussions if Lloyd Vance turns around and says, I'm not selling?
Yeah. It's like a little private fraternity. There's only 32 of them, and they control the whole league. So if an owner doesn't want to sell, there's just going to be a lot of pressure on them, I think, in terms of these owners meetings and backdoor conversations that we're not hearing. So I think that's how they would turn up the pressure on them. We saw that in Carolina with Richardson. He was a guy that had a lot of those allegations came out, and then next thing you know, the league was like, you know what? We strongly suggest you take Tepper's offer and kind of step aside. And that's what he did. And then Q, you're talking about billions of dollars. I think the Broncos were just sold, to the Walton Penner group for like $6 billion. So, you put that type of money in front of somebody like an owner, a lot of times they're going to take it. So, I know that Snyder's always wanted to own his team, and he said over his dead body, he's giving it up. So it's going to be an interesting fight. And right now they're talking about maybe Jeff Bezos get involved with all his money. And that's going to be some serious deep pockets to turn down.
All right. Lastly, before I let you get out of here, a team that's kind of flown on the radar, but has 2 potential decisions to make: Tennessee Titans, Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry. Tannehill, I still think is I would say maybe middle of the road starter right now. I'm not going to say upper echelon starter, but he's won, right? Everywhere he's gone, he's won. He's 36-19 in 4 seasons with the Titans. Henry's getting a little older. Will those 2 be on the roster next year for Tennessee come September?
Interesting one. Mike Vrabel's there, and he's took control of his team. They got Robinson out of there as the general manager, and now you have Rand Carthon coming over as a GM, and he's been brought in specifically to work with Mike Vrabel and build that team. And I think they're going to build it around Derrick Henry. They've already given him that big contract. Tannehill, just over the last couple of years, he's just played awful at the end of the season. We know that bad playoff game from a couple of years ago where he had all those interceptions, and I just don't know if the young quarterback there
Willis
is the answer. Yeah, the kid from Liberty. I just don't know if he's the guy they want to build their team around in the future. But they're going to bring another quarterback in there, maybe a bridge type of guy, and see what they can do from there. But Tannehill, he's going to want some money. He thinks he's an established veteran, but I think they've seen enough of him, and they probably are going to move on from him.
All right, good stuff as always with our NFL Insider, Lloyd Vance at Lloyd Vance. Don't forget Thursday edition of BYP from our good friends at One with Life Tequila, woman-owned, certified, organic, award-winning ultra tequila. Check them out online, onewithlifetequila.com. March 15th is a very big day in the NFL. We'll dive into a couple of the teams next week. Hopefully Aaron Rodgers decides what he's going to do. The darkness, the light, it's there. He can make a decision, and then we can move on, because this nonsense just after a while, it just drags on and on and on. And I'm getting tired of it, Lloyd. I say move on and go on with life. But as always, appreciate you jumping on a Thursday edition of BYP, and we'll do it again next week.
All right, Q. Thanks for having me on.